a shared vision for the movement. And for us, as members of Ketsa, this for me is still a vision that we may want to adopt. And the vision says that every Kenya shilling saved in a Sacco is as safe as it is in a bank. To me, other than being a shared vision, I also see it as a commitment that we may undertake. And one of the things that should not differentiate our SACCOs from the bank is the safety. I think safety should be underlined as one of the things that we have been able to bridge that gap. And everybody who thinks about where to put their money and where their money is safe, they should not consider the banks to be safer than the Sacco. And we can make safety our absolute competitive advantage. And therefore, looking at the conversation to see whether this conversation speaks to the safety of the money in the Sacco, and whether the report, one way or the other, has been able to pick areas where safety can be enhanced. So looking at the report, I picked these to be the thematic areas. And these 5 thematic areas informs the entire conversation. In fact, if we were to understand just these thematic areas, then we have understood what is the focus of the committee's report. Thematic area number 1 is regulatory harmonization and prudential oversight. And there is so much that has been discussed around this area. And we'll be looking at how the problem statement was framed, or put it differently, we'll be looking at how issues were picked. But from the onset, is the understanding that we will be operating from different regulatory frameworks. We have very many references, even within SASRA itself, the fact that we have 2 regulations guiding the cooperative movement was seen to be, or there was seen to be need for some harmonization, creating clarity as to what is the role of the commissioner, what is the role of the county government, and what is the role of SASRA itself. So that is one of the issues that has been picked. Then, together with that, is strengthening prudential oversight and moving prudential oversight from the mere numbers to the people oversight. And you'll be hearing a regime, now a regime being referred to as approved persons regime. So that was part of how the prudential oversight has been extended, so that there is even now the approved person oversight. And we'll be looking at who are the approved persons. And that is a term that has been introduced in the definition of terms. Now, another conversation is around stabilizing the cooperative movement, and key discussions is around the DGF, the Deposit Guarantee Fund, the CRF, the Central Liquidity Fund, and the stabilization scheme. And again, a conversation around even how do you pick the early signs, how do you deal with stress test, and those other engagements. So again, I know that will be coming up as part of the conversation. Yeah, so again, this is more or less related to prudential oversight, governance, and approved persons regime. And there is heavy emphasis on how the governance of the institution will be conducted. A bit of what is provided in the SASRA Board of Directors guideline now taken to be part of the Act and the regulation. Issues to do with the competence of the board, the evaluation of the board, the approval of the board, issues to do with the fit and proper test, picked and re-emphasized. And even when you look at now the BIM, the way it has proposed, it has picked that as a key area. And maintenance of approved persons register. And what that means is that for you to assume an office in the Sacco, especially for the approved persons, you require clearance from the regulator. And the people that have been identified are the board of directors and the senior managers. The register, there will be a white book and a black book. I have brought that discussion in a layman's language to mean that should you appear in the black book, just like it happens in the banks, the insurance, the role of IRA, if you want to assume a position of a CEO in any insurance company, beyond being interviewed and vetted by the board, you still require clearance from IRA. So if you're in the black book, you will miss the qualification. Then of course the other area is on the technology, the digitization and the shared services. And lastly is the issue of stability of the Sacco sector. And terms like consolidation has been introduced. The other way of looking at consolidation and the mergers. And you realize today, from the time a circular was issued on freezing of registration of new SACCOs, we are yet to start registering. So there's going to be emphasis around consolidation to create the right size of the Sacco sector as a way of, let me put it differently, allow me now to say from, use a more academic term and say, the argument is that bigger institutions are more stable than fragmented institutions. So that appears to be the thematic areas around which the committee of experts concentrated. I pause so that we can internalize, then we make progress together. Now I chose to pick what I'm referring to as the problem statement or the key issues that informed the journey. And I've already spoken to one of it being the dual regulatory system, and that then has been spoken to in terms of then how to create harmony. Now, fragmented Sacco typology, we have three types of SACCOs the way we have classified them. We have classified the SACCOs into deposit taking. We have classified the SACCOs into non-withdrawable deposit taking. And then we have the rest of the SACCOs, the ones that have not hit the 100 million. It will surprise you that the deposit taking and the regulated deposit taking are only 355 thereabout. But the number of SACCOs in Kenya got to the tune of 23,000. And so the bigger number is the one that is out there. And there is a conversation around, does it interfere with the image of the other SACCOs? So that is a conversation, and I know this is a conversation that we'll continue holding. That could also have informed why the minister, in his wisdom, advised that we freeze the registration of new SACCOs, and it has remained like that for some time. And so the question that is being raised is, how do you regulate others? And I remember even when we met with the stakeholders, when we were in Ketsa, the CEOs felt like, why would you want to have some regulated and others not regulated? Of course, regulated in quote, because they are still under a certain regime. Whether that regime is effective or not may be the issue be asked. The other issue that was picked is the fact that insider lending remains to be still a challenge. And when you look at the bill has capped insider lending, the total amount for insiders, to be 5% of the total asset. I want you to pick a pen and a paper, knowing the total asset of your society, compute 5% of it, and then distribute it to all the designers in your society. Then that will help you see whether that figure, that percentage is still high, or it is too small to take care of the insider lending. So that is the proposal you will find in the bill. The bill, I want to believe, you will either access it or you have already accessed it. Now the proposed bill, the Sacco Act. Yeah, so it has been capped to 5% of the total asset. I know those of us possibly appreciating governance and the regulatory prudence, there will be case for. That number becomes a challenge depending with the size of your society. So the other issue, so I know we big issues, but I have provoked you just to do one of the computations. The other issue you see is board eligibility. And in the report, the argument is that the board eligibility is not harmonized, and there is no very clear clarity in terms of which positions require which competences, and what should be the ultimate ideal board composition in terms of skill mix, in terms of all those variances that you could talk about. And this is an area where now the bill proposes strengthening of the same, and you will see that the bill has picked this and suggested issues to do with certification of board members, compulsory board evaluation, issues to do with board inductions as part of the conversation. So another problem that was picked is the payout, both in terms of dividend and interest. And when you now go to the bill, you see very heavy conversations around how dividend and interest will be paid. And there are very many notes. We were making fun and we said the bill now has some footnotes, notes that can also be read in form of a presentation. It has broken down how do you get approved for payout of dividend, and one of the key highlights is that you cannot borrow to pay dividend or interest. Then there is a discussion around the diluted Sacco brand, and now you start seeing conversation around who should be brand. There is a proposal that the big Saccos can convert to be credit unions and then leave the Sacco to the smaller ones. And again, that is a conversation. And according to the argument in the Committee of Experts report, is that will be adapting the name that is used globally. That when you go benchmarking, you find in those other jurisdictions they are referred to be as credit union. And so there will be this conversation around, are we the ones to run away from the name, or is it a progressive move? And then ultimately issues governance. I am unpacking the Committee of Experts report. I am not giving my opinion. I hope so that I do not look like I am communicating that this is the way I am unpacking. Yeah, again I pause so that you start now to internalize what are the issues as they have been raised. And by the way, that report is also available. I want to believe that we have access to it. We have access to it, and if you have not accessed it, you can still request ID to share with you. Even the bill is still available. Okay, so we made progress and look at what was essentially the TOR. And the TOR for the Committee of Experts was one, review the Sacco Societies Act, look at its adequacy, look at the gaps, and see whether there could be proposed interventions. Then, the other one is the establishment of the DGF, that was also part of the TOR, and then design and implement CLF, Central Liquidity Fund, and then of course the development of shared services platform for SACCOs. So when you go to the bill, you will see it very heavy on these 4 areas. Areas that need to be amended. Then we now have a definition and the improvement. Like for example, you knew that DGF existed in the Sacco Act and the bill, and the proposal, the conversation now is how can it be strengthened, and we'll be looking at what were some of the issues that the stakeholders had raised. Yeah, so what I have done, I have consolidated what a number of stakeholders that I'm aware of had said about many areas. So I'll be picking an issue that was raised by the stakeholder, and then I'll be going to the committee of expert report to see how they crafted it. So the regulation, stakeholders had looked at the Sacco Act. They had looked at the regulations 2010 specifically, but even the regulation 2020, and identified that there were gaps. And some of the areas that the stakeholders picked was on the issue of the licensing framework. And they felt that all SACCOs should be under one way or the other a regulatory environment. And they proposed, because we have different types of SACCOs, then the regulatory framework should be cognizant of that fact. So stakeholders had said that licensing should be based on the size, the services offered, and the risk exposure. Now, these are heavy conversations. So when you talk about size, then you're referring to the balance sheet size. So you've already introduced a discussion around what we call the tired regulatory environment, creating tiers. When you talk about the risk, then you are talking about the risk-based regulatory environment and many other issues. And also make it easy for even the small SACCOs to be regulated. So this was part of what the committee of experts picked from the stakeholders. So yeah, so we come to a point where one of the proposals, is it possible for us to have a tired capital adequacy framework? And this framework should be based on the size of the Sacco that you are looking at. And what is the risk profile of that institution? And the argument was, as the risk profile of an institution changes, then the capital adequacy requirement may also change. Incidentally, this is not a new requirement. Even when you look at the regulation as it sits today, there is that provision that the regulator may require a higher capital adequacy when the risk profile of the institution changes. And so this is what the committee of experts proposed. Maybe this has come a bit early, but one of in the aspect of a unified legal framework for SACCOs, now the committee of experts proposed that all secondary SACCOs taking deposit now be regulated by SACCO. And I know you know this journey starting from Cusco, the regulation of even our own institution, Ketsa. Now the bill has onboarded secondary cooperatives that are doing deposit taking to be regulated by SACCO. It has also proposed, interestingly so, that even housing and investment cooperatives be put under the regulatory framework of SACCO. And that the small SACCOs below 100 million, but above 50 million, still be onboarded for regulation. And that any subsidiary that is registered by a Sacco will also become part of the entity to be regulated by SACCO. So that all entities owned by the Sacco now be consolidated for the purposes of representation and even licensing. Any Sacco shared services will also has been proposed for registration. And Sacco-owned service entities. Now this is what the bill is proposing. You'll be looking at it to see the extent to which that adds to the safety, because that is the vision, and the extent to which maybe it creates discomfort. And I know the details now will be helping you see how do we take care of this. So this is under a unified legal framework for SACCOs. As for the tier licensing, there is a proposal that we have at Tier 1, and the Tier 1 is just like it is today. All SACCOs that are 5 million and above. So it is, all these will be under full prudential standards. So to me, they will obey the prudential guidelines as they are to the letter. Then for Tier 2, these are still the mid-size deposit taking and the big non-withdrawable deposit taking. You may be surprised that we have quite a number of non-deposit taking SACCOs that are bigger than deposit taking. In fact, some are huge. It's only that there is no rule that forces a society when it hits 5 million to convert, but we have non-deposit taking that are very big. Then Tier 3 to 4, these are smaller non-deposit taking SACCOs, and the proposal is that their reporting can be made right. And that is actually how it is. So what you realize now is that even the non-deposit taking SACCOs that had been given lighter requirements like reporting on quarterly may be upgraded to be reporting the way any deposit taking SACCOs report. Then we have what we call the Tier 3 and 4, where they have still lighter reporting requirement. And then the Tier 5, these are societies that are below 50 million, and they are supposed to be, they have not been proposed to be onboarded to such a requirement. They will remain under the purview of the county directors for cooperatives, and of course the commissioner for cooperatives. And this is the introduction of what we are referring to as the risk-based approach. And where the risk is perceived to be high, then the regulator will keep on enforcing more stringent requirements. So I want to believe that the concept of higher licensing framework has been well unpacked. I can pause for a second or so, just to see whether there is anybody who wants to engage with. Yeah, so that is as far as the licensing framework is concerned. So we can go to the other issue, and the other issue was on liquidity management. And this was a comment from the stakeholders. And the stakeholders thought that there is still some work that need to be done around liquidity management. Some stakeholders thought that we do not even have measures for what we call early warning signs, and they proposed stress testing mechanism to ensure that we can assess the resilience of our SACCOs under different market scenarios. And then of course interventions, looking at how the commercial banks are structured. You see that there are resolutions, there are interventions, and the stakeholders thought that we also now come of age and it is possible to provide some of this mechanism as a way of preempting total failure of a cooperative. And I believe you have seen this. So from the bill, this is picked from the bill. The bill has proposed deposit protection and also an aspect of stabilization. And in the aspect of protection is the deposit guarantee fund. And I know the conversation will continue as to whether do we go up to 500,000, 500 is 1,000, the way it is in the ADIC, or do we remain at the 100 that was previously proposed in the Act? And then also this brings back now to the Central Liquidity Fund, and we see how the proposal to structure it is. And then stabilization protection scheme. Now this is a new concept. The stabilization protection scheme is whether you can inject a fund in a society that is under distress as a way of restoring total collapse. And before you get to this point, what will be the early warning signs that will help the regulator to indicate or observe that this institution requires help? And the whole idea is for member confidence and sector resilience. So in the definition of terms, you will see the definition of what now is being referred to as SPS, Stabilization Protection Scheme. And these are good conversations. I know even especially for the CEOs in the room, these are conversations that would make a lot of sense, and they could even be deeper and richer than what possibly the way I'm presenting. Yeah, so this is the proposal, and the proposal is now amend section 61A C, so that the Central Liquidity Fund is born. So the purpose is a mutual liquidity facility for emergency loans to members, and the idea is, so ownership. And ownership has been discussed. If you look at how ownership would look like, there's a proposal of full members. The full members will have full access to the facility. There is a proposal for associate members. They will have access to the facility. And there is a category of people being referred to as pay as you go. So these are essentially, you can say these are essentially non-members, and they will be subjected to high cost, heavy scrutiny, and access is not guaranteed. Now, how that will be structured will be now what will be waiting to see in the regulations. And maybe this is another area for conversation. So it looks like there will be a category that will be around to become full member, associate member. There will be a category that will be around to pay as they go. So you can't pick the money, you pay at possibly market rate, and you pay under the terms that will be stipulated. So this facility can also access funds from CPK, and Section 61 is being proposed to be amended so that it can allow this facility to access. And of course, there will be a criteria for how it is accessed. Then the second one is what we are referring to as the SPS, the Stabilization Protection Scheme. And the idea is to intervene in a state where a Sacco is experiencing distress. It is an intervention before more elaborate interventions are invoked. And one of the more elaborate interventions that can be invoked is a merger. Merger as a strategy for resolution. And if you look at what the central bank has been doing for the last couple of years, an era of regulatory resolution. Now, if I use a different term, it would be compulsory mergers. So, in terms of SPS, it would also be operated as a secondary cooperative. And then it would be under the purview of SACCO, and the details of eligibility will be provided from the regulation all the way to the policies. Again, I want to pause there. In fact, this is now how I want to pause. You could engage your neighbor and find out from your neighbor which areas they are finding to be very progressive and requires more engagement and more discussion, and which areas you want to hear more from now, or they may require stakeholders, a wider stakeholders engagement. Today is just unpacking. A different way of saying it is sensitization. So please engage your neighbor. Up to that point, I am sure your neighbor has got something to say. Let me see some conversations happening.
What does the legal say? What does the legal say?
Also coming to my mind is this. Once you come from the team review, you would allow tables to have conversations. Then you would allow a few tables to make their observations, sharing their information, just as a way of internalizing what are the proposals. So it would be interesting to hear what are the comments, and maybe those are the comments that we could consolidate and see whether now, even as Ketsa, whether we could now start picking issues that require further engagement. Like I said, I expect that at one point or the other, you'll be invited even to share memorandum. So we could start preparing ourselves for that opportunity before it comes. Yeah, so now that I have suggested that we give each and every table an opportunity to speak and have their own conversations, allow me then to make progress. So in terms of investment, the stakeholders felt that the Sacco sector is too restricted in terms of areas of investment. And when you go to the committee of expert report, they picked issue with the regulations on restricted business. And maybe for lack of a better term, they describe that legislation as outdated. Maybe there could have been a better term. And in the Committee of Experts report, this is what they consider to be the problem. That SACCOs are excluded from the real-time gross settlement. They are not allowed to participate in what is referred to as the automated clearing house, the payment service providers, the money remittance provider, whereas SACCOs do a lot of diaspora banking. They do not have direct access. Whereas they move a lot of money, but they do not participate in the payment. They are not allowed to become licensed as payment service providers. And I think this could be one of the very progressive things if it was going to happen. That now societies, SACCOs will participate into the national payment systems. And the proposal is there should be a criteria for qualifying a society to start participating as opposed to blanket denial of that access. And this can be unfolded, and I think this is one of the area where we can build capacity. But this is also an area for shared services and collaboration, so that we could see how, if one doesn't have capacity individually, then how do we do a collaboration for the same? So when you go to the bill, you see a discussion around that. Then in terms of the governance structure, the stakeholders have mentioned about the efficacy of the fit and proper test criteria, directors training, and issues to do with appraisals, especially for the board. And what the Committee of Experts have proposed, and this number, an amendment of Section 47A, and the proposal one is now have a mandatory code of conduct prescribed by the authority. Number two, introduce minimum competence requirement for board members. Number three, an ethical code of conduct and internal controls. Number four is now a verifiable board evaluation and training requirement. And this will be a collaboration between the regulator and the commission. And two is strengthen the vetting criteria, Section 48A now, and it will be looking at the financial status and solvency, qualification and relevant experience, reputation, there will be a register, and then of course, history of convictions, fraud, or malpractices. Then there is also an amendment to introduce Section 47B, and it is to bring up the issue of approved persons regime. And the approved persons that require the vetting of the authority include the board chairperson, the board vice, the treasurer, the CEO, the CFO, and the head of internal auditor, and other specified positions, especially the key positions. So I'll be surprised if the head of ICT is left out, and those other key positions that determine. Then there will be a public register maintained and accessible. Now, I think those days when shy to write to SACCO to ask whether this person is right to be picked, they appear like they will be now long gone. And if you appear in the bad book, you may miss out on the approval. So again, allow me to pause there for a second so that you can internalize. And then when we come back, it will be interesting from where you are sitting with your colleagues, what issues you pick. Yes, yeah, you can see the price on the Rangati.
Yeah, also telling is it a misprint that on the approved persons regime, that is section 47B?
Yes.
We have noted the treasurer, stock honorary treasurer. Is this secretary or?
Yeah, that should be honorary secretary. Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
So it is maybe quote unquote the executive, isn't it? As it were, the way we knew it. So, an interesting regime, approved persons regime. When you go to CMA, IRIs, CPK, RBA, these are normal practices. So, we could also argue that it appears we are sooner going to cross the bridge between how all financial institutions are being regulated. So I can look at, now this is the general status of the Sacco Act and the areas. Now we can go to the specifics. The stakeholders finding on DGF. So, one of the questions that the stakeholders were keen to see is how the DGF itself will be governed. You can imagine a scenario where you have a deposit guarantee fund that has failed before any Sacco has benefited. And so those were the questions that were being raised. And I remember when we met with SACCOs, they wanted to see whether we still have the capacity to run a DGF as an institution. And especially now that we are coming from the backdrop of what happened to the union. So the many questions they raised is on the legal establishment. And they had proposed that the Sacco Act be amended to accommodate that, and indeed that has already happened. 2 is the criteria for contribution. Should it be risk-based contribution? Should it be uniform? 3 is on the governance of DGF itself. Who will be entrusted in it? 4, this should be 4, is on how it will be reporting and what will be the regulatory safeguards. So those are the questions that the stakeholders had raised. So what is it that has been proposed? 1 is who should contribute. And the proposal is that all licensed SACCOs, it is mandatory for them to be participants to the DGF. Now the amendment is that we move this DGF from being managed internally and be taken to the KDIC, the Kenya Depositors Insurance Corporation, and that there will be an administrator of the fund. So the areas that I know you now have serious engagement is on how it will be computed. There is a proposal that it be 0.1% of the total deposit. Again, you can pick a pen and a paper and knowing your deposit level, see how much that would be. that will help you now to start seeing what is it that we are talking about and whether that is on the lower side or on the higher side. Yeah, so you can see the numbers. I know now again when you'll be having your conversations and when you'll be making some of the comments, it will be interesting to see or rather to hear what it is that you say about it. So now that it is mandatory, then there should be a way in which it is enforceable, and the proposal is that one way or the other, there should be some charges for failure to contribute. Then in terms of coverage limit, it will be an area of regulation, like we said at the moment, the figure was said to be 100 million, not 100 million, 100,000, but progressively, remember KDIC has been moving its coverage limit, it has now hit 500,000. And then there will be disclosure in form of annual audit report. Then again, the stakeholders have their view concerning the CLF, the Central Liquidity Fund, and these were the concerns for the CLF. The legal recognition, therefore, the stakeholders proposed that we amend the Sacco Act, and again, when you go down to the Sacco Act, you see the amendment has been put there. The other question was on the governance structure. Who will be entrusted to run the CLF? And I think this is still a conversation. We'll be seeing what is it has been proposed. And what will be the role of SACCO? And the proposal was that SACCO should provide oversight. How will the contributions be made, the contribution framework? Who can access and disbursement? And then, of course, issues to do with transparency and reporting. And the proposal was that there should be annual audit of account. So this I have picked from what the stakeholders had commented. And this would cause me to go back to a slide I had shared on this aspect, because this is still related to the liquidity management. And so now section 61 A to C has been proposed for amendment so that it can accommodate that. And the proposal in terms of the governance structure is that this can be managed by a secondary cooperative regulated by SACCO. And that is why now again, if I also take you back in terms of the regulatory framework, is that all secondary SACCOs taking deposits will be regulated. So an end-to-end in terms of if this is the structure that will manage the CLF, then that same structure, if it falls under secondary cooperative, then it will be under the regulation of SACCO. In terms of contribution, the same discussion, full membership, associate, and pay as you go. And so you can see all the sections that will be amended A to C. And closely related to it is what we are referring to as SPS, the Stabilization Protection Scheme. So if you come back to the concerns that the stakeholders had, legal recognition, governance structure, the role of oversight, contribution, access, and reporting, they appear to have been taken care of in the proposed amendment. Again, I pose therefore a second just to help you internalize, be able to pick conversations when we come from our team. So, if you remember in the problem statement or the issues, there was the issue on dividend payout and just dividend and interest payout. And the bill has this comment: one, it shall only be paid from net profit or from the income. There should be no borrowing to pay dividend. One must have met the capital and liquidity threshold, and there will be regulatory approval where necessary. And the bill is even neat in terms of even the level of provisioning must be met before interest and dividend are declared. I know this is a conversation we have had for some time. It is part of the areas that maybe in the thinking of the COE and maybe other stakeholders is an area where self-regulation is proving to be difficult. So when you go to the bill, this is what the bill says. Section 34A now will be revisited, and it has been revisited as we speak, that only net profit after all rules, provisions, and after meeting capital adequacy and reserve requirement, dividend must not cause core capital to fall below minimum prescribed. Authority veto to power. Authority may gazette to prohibit dividend if payment would be imprudent. No debt funded. Prior approval regime means that authority may require advance approval before dividend declaration. If Sacco is under observation, and in terms of the remedial action, that the authority may direct recovery. This is interesting to hear. It may direct recovery of improper payouts, reduce future dividend, or suspend officers. So that is in terms of what would be the regulatory enforcement space. Then the insider lending, I think we have already discussed this. Insiders, this for me is not a new requirement in terms of nobody should enjoy preferred treatment. Maybe the discussion is on capping to 5% and directors not approving their own rules. And insider loans in arrears for more than 90 days reported immediately to the authority and board, and insider excluded from board deliberations, and of course recovery enforcement. So yeah, this again you find them in the bill. The key risk controls, limit on insider lending, independent loan approval processes. Then there is an aspect of credit information sharing, and two discussions here exist, and sector credit data exchange. Maybe just allow me to speak to the sector credit data exchange. And one good member called me and at pain that she's aware that one of the members in their society has a defaulting account in another Sacco. But in the era of data protection, she cannot disclose it. So she was wondering what is it that she could do. So what this sector credit data exchange is doing, it is curing that. That it is possible for a judge from Imarika to call a counterpart, say Mafanikio, and say there is a member who has come, or even access that information. The way we access information from CRB, you can just go to now the sector and see whether this member has a loan from your neighboring society. And that information assignment, that information gap can be cured. So what is the proposal? Amend section 35A and make credit information sharing an obligation. So mandatory participation in CRB, mandatory. and of course submission of data, and then of course be guided by also the Data Protection Act, Cap 41(1)(c). So Tier 4 and 5 SACCOs may receive exemptions depending on what the regulator will say, and non-compliance would translate to a fine. Section 35B now has been introduced to provide for Sacco sector exchange. So the authority establishes a Sacco sector credit information exchange. And all the data will be collected and analyzed by the sector-wide credit data, and the reports will be generated, and it will also be used for providing early warning indicators and integrated with Central Bank of Kenya, KDIC, and other regulators. So this is an intervention also for how our members are operating within that space. And then of course, section 35C on shared services platform. And this will be an aspect of the regulations. What is it that the platform can do? What kind of services the platform would provide? And all that discussions on the shared service, the shared provide service. Provide service. 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 was